Back in the late 1990s, Jamaica faced a truly impossible choice: either let its entire financial system collapse into dust or pay a price so ridiculously high it would cripple the country for a whole generation. This is the story of that choice, the Finsac crisis, a real devil's bargain that would end up shaping the nation for decades. This whole story really boils down to one central paradox. How could the very same government action be celebrated for saving the country's economy, while also being blamed for completely destroying a generation of its most ambitious citizens? That's the puzzle we're going to unpack right now. And this, right here, lays out that conflict perfectly. On one hand, Finsac was this incredible lifeline that saved the entire financial system. But on the other, it was a heavy anchor that pulled an entire class of Jamaican business owners under the water. So how can both of these things be true at the same time? Well, to get that, we've got to go back to the beginning. All right, so let's set the stage. We're going to start with how this big, hopeful dream of economic independence for Jamaica actually kind of planted the seeds for the disaster to come. It all started with this really noble idea, right? Jamaicanization. The whole point was to put local entrepreneurs, Jamaicans, in charge of the country's banks. But what followed was the super fast, poorly supervised liberalization, which basically flooded the market with all these new banks. And then, bam! Inflation hits a staggering 80% in 1991. That fueled this massive real estate bubble, all built on some really shaky ground. And when the government finally slammed on the brakes to fight that inflation, the bubble, well, it didn't just leak, it completely exploded. So what was going on inside these new banks that made them so risky? This slide gets right to the heart of it. First, connected lending. That basically means they were taking your savings, the depositor's money, and using it to fund their own risky side hustles in real estate. Then you had this asset-liability mismatch. They were using short-term savings, money that could be pulled out at any time, for these really long-term, high-risk gambles. And finally, they were just shuffling money around between companies to dodge the few rules that even existed. It was, a total house of cards. So that house of cards starts to wobble. The government has to do something. And what they did was a massive, desperate gamble. Okay, so to crush that out-of-control inflation, the government jacked up interest rates to just astronomical levels. We're talking over 60%. Can you even imagine trying to run a business or pay your mortgage when your loan rate suddenly jumps to 60%? It was just impossible. Businesses started failing left and right, property values tanked, and all those loans that were backing them, they became worthless overnight. And this is the moment of pure, absolute panic. People, they were terrified of losing their entire life savings, so they rushed to the banks to pull their money out. This run on the banks was the final straw. If something drastic didn't happen right then, the whole system was going to implode. And that's where Finsac comes in. The government creates this company, the Financial Sector Adjustment Company. Its mission sounds simple, but it was enormous. Take over all the failing banks, make sure ordinary people's money was safe, and just stop the panic. It was pretty much the financial version of calling in the cavalry. Now, this is maybe the most crucial part of the whole plan, the blanket guarantee. The government basically promised that every single dollar in people's bank accounts, their pensions, their insurance policies, it was all safe. And this is a really important distinction. This was designed to protect the average person, the saver, not the bank owners and shareholders who'd made all the risky bets in the first place. And you know what? In that primary mission, Finsac was, without a doubt, a success. Let's take a look at what they actually managed to pull off against all odds. It worked. Just like that, the bank runs stopped. People felt confident again. The savings of 1.5 million people were completely protected. And amazingly, the basic machinery of the economy just kept on humming. You could still get cash from an ATM, your checks didn't bounce. Finsac even managed to rescue and rebuild what is now Jamaica's biggest bank, NCB. And it forced the creation of a whole new modern regulatory system to stop this from happening again. So if you look at it just by those metrics, it was a stunning success. But it came at a terrible, terrible cost. Okay, now for the other side of this coin. Let's dig into how the very methods used to save the system ended up, destroying the exact people that whole Jamaicanization dream was supposed to empower in the first place. This quote from Yola Greatbaker, it just says it all. While the savers were protected, the borrowers got absolutely crushed. Those insane interest rates created these impossible nightmares situations. You had people who'd borrowed money in good faith, and now their debts were spiraling into numbers that didn't even make sense. They'd repay way more than they ever borrowed and still lose everything. And this is probably the single most controversial part of the entire saga. So Finsac took all these so-called bad loans and sold them off in one big bundle to a foreign company, JRF, for just pennies on the dollar. But here's the real kicker. The Jamaican borrowers themselves were never offered that same discount. So this foreign firm buys their debt for super cheap, but then gets the legal right to chase them down for the full, ridiculously inflated amount. For so many people, this felt like a complete and utter betrayal.
So, this bailout didn't just have a devastating human cost, it had a national price tag that would take Jamaica something like 3 decades to finally pay off.
Okay, get ready for this number. The final bill for the Finsac bailout added debt that was equivalent to 40% of Jamaica's entire annual economic output, its GDP. That makes it one of the costliest bank rescues in modern history, especially when you consider the size of the economy. And this chart right here, man, it just shows you the brutal impact. The national debt more than doubled. It soared from around 72% of GDP all the way up to over 140%. Almost overnight, Jamaica became one of the most indebted nations on the entire planet. And this is where that cost becomes real for every single person in the country. For years and years, sometimes called the lost decades, as much as 60 cents of every single tax dollar collected went just to paying interest on this Finsac debt. Think about that. That's money that couldn't go to roads, to schools, to hospitals. It basically starved the country of the investment it desperately needed to grow. But the story doesn't just end in debt. After decades of really painful fiscal discipline, the recovery is, well, it's pretty remarkable. Just look at this turnaround. By 2025, that debt to GDP ratio, which was once over 140%, slashed down to around 68%. Inflation, which peaked over 80%, tamed, and unemployment fell to historic lows. It's really a testament to the country's incredible resilience after paying such an unbelievably heavy price. So that brings us right back to where we started, to that central dilemma. Finsac was a success, no doubt, in that it stopped a total economic meltdown. But it was an absolute catastrophe for a whole generation of entrepreneurs and for the nation's finances for decades. And it leaves us with this really stark, timeless question. When the system is on the brink, who pays the price for saving it?